It was the 1094th day of being Mrs. Henry, and I proposed divorce to Henry. A hint of confusion flashed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by his usual noble demeanor. As you wish. He said it indifferently, as if we were discussing whether to change the milk on the breakfast table. He didn't even bother to ask why. On the 1095th day, as if nothing had happened, I gently sent him and the children out and then completely left the Henry family. At first, Henry and his family thought I was just throwing a tantrum, but gradually they realized something was wrong. The first one to make a fuss was the youngest son, Lucas. At first, he was happy that the mother who always fussed over him had left, but on the day of the school garden party, his father forgot to tell the nanny to prepare cookies for him. When his classmates, who were eager to eat the bear-shaped cookies baked by his mother, gathered around him and he could only take out the finished products bought from the bakery, he suddenly realized that his mother might not be so useless after all. The second one who couldn't adapt was Edward. He clearly hated the woman who had used despicable means to take his mother's place the most. But on the day of the thunderstorm, when he leaned against the door panel and couldn't hear the gentle singing behind the door, he suddenly panicked. Henry's mother was the third. Because the family doctor told her that her blood pressure had risen again and this time she needed to start taking medication to control it. She suddenly realized that she hadn't eaten the healthy meals prepared by Juliet for more than half a month. Even Henry's married sister-in-law, Daphne, began to inquire about when Henry was going to bring his wife back, either intentionally or unintentionally. Henry's family began to mention me frequently in front of Henry, and some even started to persuade him that a man should be magnanimous and it wouldn't lose his status to bow his head and coax his wife occasionally. Finally, Henry's mother couldn't bear it anymore. At the breakfast table, she gave Henry an ultimatum. Henry, I know you're a man and you care about your face, but husband and wife shouldn't grow apart. If it's inconvenient for you to call Juliet back, let this old woman talk to her. Henry's already unfriendly face became even colder. They all thought he was too proud to bow his head to me. In fact, he had called me the day after I left. But he was blocked. The phone number that he had never dialed in 10 years, when he finally decided to call it, could no longer be reached. Thinking of this, the man's face became even uglier. His eyes swept over his two sons, who were looking at him expectantly though they didn't speak. A sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart. Mom, don't worry about Juliet and me. How could that be? You two still have 2 children. How could this woman be so irresponsible? For the first time, he felt that his mother's nagging made him so restless. If you can find her, then go ahead. He roared and turned to leave. Only then did he realize that Juliet could affect his emotions to such an extent. The 3 people at the table looked at each other in dismay. The old lady took out her phone first. I'll ask her if she still wants this family or not. But on the other end of the phone was a mechanical female voice. The number you dialed is out of service area. The 2 boys couldn't sit still either and started dialing that number respectively, but with the same result. At this time, it was Edward who spoke first. She never doesn't answer our calls. Could something have happened to her? Henry's hand on the doorknob paused, and scenes of crime scenes flashed through his mind like a revolving lantern. His heart suddenly panicked. Oliver, my wife is missing. Please help me call the police. Wait, first contact several private detectives and conduct a secret investigation. I'll send you the information later. Henry pinched the center of his brows in pain, forcing himself to calm down. I settled in a small southern town and rented a small courtyard. At the moment, I was lying in a rattan chair, enjoying the rare coolness of a summer afternoon. The small town was very livable, with nice scenery all year round. I planned to open a flower shop here. I used to dislike things like flowers and plants, which I thought were not practical. But in the 3 years of being Mrs. Henry, I had somehow developed a refined taste. Henry found me on the evening of the 3rd day. His always proper attire had a rare small flaw. Following my gaze, his eyes fixed on the button on his cuff that was about to fall off. A hint of embarrassment appeared on his otherwise cold face. Why don't you go home? His voice was cold that I looked up at him in surprise. Mr. Henry, as your soon-to-be ex-wife, I don't think I need to be in your house anymore. It was quite strange. I saw an angry expression on Henry's face for the first time. That is our marriage and family just a joke to you? I kind of hated his current attitude, and my face showed impatience. On the 1094th day, I proposed divorce, and you agreed. Forgot? Henry was clearly not a good person to argue with. He never hit the point. You just said, the 1094th day? A look of confusion appeared on his face that I realized I had said the wrong thing. Although I was prepared to tell Henry's family the truth for fear of being pestered by them, at the moment, I still tried to muddle through Mr. Henry, whenever you're available, we can go to the Civil Affairs Bureau. He frowned and it took him a while to say, everyone has been very uncomfortable these days without you. Henry let out a soft sigh. Mom's blood pressure is high, and the doctor has suggested medication. Edward's grades have also dropped, and the teacher said he sleeps in class. I interrupted him. Mr. Henry, those are your mother and son. What do they have to do with me? The man seemed not to expect me to say such a thing, and his handsome brows furrowed even tighter. Juliet, I think we may need to talk. If there are any misunderstandings, it's best to clear them up as soon as possible. I suddenly had a mischievous thought and imitated Henry's usual expression. Henry, I don't need to explain every decision of mine to you. There are some things you may not understand even if I explain. I made a request, and you agreed. Isn't it a win-win situation? His expression changed again. It was really strange. In the 3 years of being his wife, I saw more changes in his facial expressions today than in the past 3 years combined. What about Lucas? Your own son. Are you going to abandon him too? Hearing this name, the heart of this body still ached involuntarily. I remembered that in Juliet's last days, this was the child she was most worried about. But the more closely related people are, the more deeply they can hurt. A 4 or 5-year-old boy, with a childish voice, loudly expressed his wish. Dad, I don't want this bad woman to be my mom. I want to be Aunt Mia's child like my brother. Lucas said this in front of all of Henry's family. Edward looked at Juliet provocatively. Henry was probably about to scold him but was stopped by Henry's mother and his sister-in-law. They said, children and fools speak the truth. How can an adult argue with a child? At that time, I thought that there was indeed no need to argue with a child, but what about the adults who instigated and induced him? But Juliet at that time didn't say anything. She helped Lucas put on his outdoor clothes, neatly packed the gifts to be taken to Mia's house one by one, and then, together with the servants at home, stood at the door to see this family off to Henry's ex-wife's house to celebrate Edward's birthday. Only I could see that in that moment of turning around, Juliet's eyes were red. Thinking of this, my expression turned cold. That it's clearly written in the divorce agreement. I don't covet the money, the house, or the people in your Henry family. You. Henry didn't expect me to suddenly lose my temper. He stammered for a while before saying, Juliet, what on earth is wrong with you? We're a family. Only if you tell me what happened can we solve it together. A family? I chewed on these 2 words with a sarcastic tone. He rarely counted me as part of the Henry family. Even though I was publicly announced as Mrs. Henry, in fact, there was a clear line between me and the Henry family. What was I in the Henry family? Probably a more senior housekeeper. Henry's mother, Edward, Lucas, his sister-in-law, and even Henry's ex-wife were all included in his definition of family, but me, I was not. Mr. Henry, have you really ever regarded me as part of the family? I smiled ironically. If I remember correctly, every member of the Henry family will get at least 3% of the shares of Henry Group. Miss Mia, your ex-wife, and Mr. Daniel, your brother-in-law, both have it. Then I want to ask you, as your current wife, a member of your family, where are my shares in Henry Group? Henry's hand formed a loose fist, which was a habitual action when he felt stressed. Juliet, you're different from them. You don't understand company affairs. Really? Do I have to issue orders at the board meeting of Henry Group to hold shares in your family? Do I have to become a professional manager first? He was rebuffed by me, and his expression was embarrassed for a moment. Juliet, I didn't know you cared about this. After we go back, I can discuss with them about giving you shares. I sneered. No need, Mr. Henry. You've missed the point again. I'm not negotiating terms with you now. I'm telling you that I'm tired of being Mrs. Henry. I don't want anything. I just want to divorce you. Please take your whole family and get out of my life. Henry's face instantly turned liver-colored. Probably because he had been in a position of power for too long and had never been directly despised like this. He turned around and left neatly, leaving behind a sentence. See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. When Henry got home, he was so annoyed that he didn't even want to talk and just wanted to hide in the study as soon as possible. But Lucas was still too young to understand the situation. He missed his mother and asked straightforwardly. Dad, can you bring Mom back? Lucas wants Mom to send him to school and read picture books with him. The eldest son also stood up. Dad, is she okay? He looked up at the three people in the family who should have gone to bed long ago. Because of that woman, they were still waiting for him at this time, and his annoyance grew even stronger. He thought to himself, you're all eagerly looking forward to that woman coming back, but in her eyes, you're nothing but annoying burdens. The man opened his mouth, not knowing how to tell them that he was going to get divorced and that woman would never come back. She's doing well. She opened a flower shop in a small town in the south. He picked the question from his eldest son, which was the easiest to answer. Then Dad, quickly bring Mom back. Lucas said naively. He suddenly felt powerless. Thinking of that woman's attitude, he hardened his heart and said, she won't come back. We'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get divorced tomorrow. What? This time it was Henry's mother. How can you be so irresponsible? Why are you getting divorced when everything is fine? Mom. He called out. Don't worry about it. Thinking of that woman's attitude of despising their family, he viciously added, anyway, she didn't come to be Mrs. Henry in a proper way. It's best if she has thought it through and doesn't pester our family anymore. Henry's mother seemed to be choked by his words. It took her a long time to say, Henry, actually, she has been doing her best as your wife these years. Don't hold that against her anymore. But Henry seemed to be venting the disrespect he received during the day and continued, it's better to get divorced. With her character, she might corrupt Edward and Lucas. Mom, you should also think about Lucas. If she continues to live with Lucas, and Lucas later finds out that his mother is a woman who will stop at nothing to get ahead, how painful will he be? He was about to continue but was interrupted by Henry's mother. That's enough, Henry. Stop talking. In Henry's memory, this was the first time his mother had defended Juliet in front of him. Before he could react, his mother's eyes welled up with tears first. Henry, actually I should have told you this earlier, but... Sigh, you reminded me today. I shouldn't have let you be distant from Juliet because of my own selfish desires. Probably because what she was going to say was too hard to say, the old lady took a long time to recover and then said, You've always resented Juliet for drugging you at the reception that year, forcing you to marry her. She then looked at Edward, her beloved eldest grandson. Edward, you've also resented her all these years for making your parents lose the chance to get back together because of this, right? So all these years, no matter how nice she was to you, how much she cared for and loved you, you were cold to her and didn't even call her mom. Actually, you don't know that it wasn't her who drugged you. It was this old woman. It was all a misunderstanding. Even Juliet was a victim. The three of them stared wide-eyed. Edward even felt his body trembling slightly. He really hated that woman because she drugged his dad, making it impossible for his dad to get back together with his mom and making it impossible for him to have a complete family. But if all of this was a misunderstanding, then what he had done to that woman all these years? He didn't dare to think further. Henry's mother continued, back then, I actually wanted to match Henry and Edward's mom. Your divorce was hasty, and later your relationship wasn't bad either. I thought you two were both stubborn and not the type to easily bow down, so this old woman, wanted to give you a hand. At the reception that day, I prepared the drug. It was originally meant for Henry and Edward's mom, but by mistake, the glass of wine that Edward's mom should have drunk was drunk by Juliet. At first, I also thought this woman knew something and made the best of a wrong situation on purpose. But later, when I happened to talk about this with Emma, we realized that we ourselves had made a mistake and given the wrong person the wine. But at that time, Juliet had already given birth to Lucas. I privately worried that she might treat Edward badly after having her own child. I thought that with this stain on her, she would at least have to pretend to love Edward. So I've kept this secret until today. Grandma. Edward felt a bitter taste as he called out this grandma. He stiffened his neck, as if stubbornly holding on to his last bit of pride. Then why didn't she explain it herself? Why was she willing to carry this blame for so many years? She did explain, but none of us believed her. Henry said with difficulty. Somehow, he thought of a long time ago incident. Once, when he was drunk and on top of Juliet, Juliet pushed him away, saying she didn't want to. That day, he had been annoyed outside. Seeing the refusal in Juliet's eyes, he subconsciously said, "Don't you dream of being with me? Now that you've got what you want, what are you being coy about?" He clearly remembered that Juliet's eyes dimmed. She said, "Henry, I do like you, but I've never schemed against you, and I never thought of having sex with you." He just sneered and continued his actions on Juliet. At that time, he didn't believe her and didn't care about Juliet either. Over the years, who in their family had cared about Juliet? In their hearts, they had long judged her guilty and labeled her as despicable. Only Lucas was confused. He asked cautiously, "Grandma means that Mom didn't break up brother's mom and dad's relationship? Mom isn't a mistress?" Edward couldn't hold back any longer. He hugged his younger brother tightly and said, "Lucas, those words I told you before, no, and what we heard, what Grandma and Aunt said about your mom, were all wrong. We were all lying to you. We all lied. Your mom isn't a mistress and she isn't a bad person. She's really, really nice." Edward couldn't go on. He was so choked up that he couldn't even say a complete sentence. The next day, at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, from a distance, I saw the whole Henry family. I couldn't figure out why, just for a divorce, did they have to come in such a showy way? As soon as I got closer, Lucas rushed up and hugged my leg. "Mom, where have you been? Lucas misses you so much." This child had never been very close to me. He was taught well by the Henry family, self-disciplined and polite. But towards me, his own mother, he was always cold. If it was before, his affectionate gesture would have made me flattered. But now, on the 1095th day, I no longer had to be false with this family. I looked at Henry. "Your son is so ill-mannered. Aren't you going to discipline him?" I saw the expressions of Henry's family members change. Perhaps Henry was afraid that his son would be sad. He stepped forward first and took the child into his arms. "Juliet, Lucas just wants to be close to his mom. He didn't do anything wrong." "Really?" I couldn't help but squat down with a mischievous thought and look into Lucas's eyes. But how can a bad woman like me be worthy of being Lucas's mom? Lucas's eyes instantly turned red, but he held back his tears. "Juliet, I know you've suffered grievances these years, but you can't treat Lucas like this. He's just a child." Henry's voice was filled with suppressed anger. I stood up indifferently. "It doesn't matter. Then let's quickly get the divorce certificate. I won't stop you from finding a good stepmom for him." Juliet. This time it was Henry's mother. She always liked to act like a matriarch in front of me. Whether the tea I made was too cold or too hot, or the dishes I cooked were too oily or too bland, the old lady was never stingy about trying any means to make things difficult for me. I remember one winter, the old lady heard about pickled vegetable buns from somewhere and asked me to make them for her. I made cage after cage from day to night, but she was still not satisfied. Later, when the kitchen staff had left work and I was dozing off against the table, I heard the servant say, "This old lady is really good at making things difficult." The mistress has steamed 7 or 8 cages repeatedly, right? Yeah, indeed. It's not that she's dissatisfied with the buns. It's clearly about the person. How did I get through that? Oh, yes. In the cold winter, I drove alone to the countryside, visited 5 or 6 villages, and finally bought the pickled vegetables made by the ancient method that the old lady wanted. Only then did she stop. I looked at Henry's mother. Save your breath, please. Your former daughter-in-law, can't afford to receive your teachings. Wait until your son finds you a new one, and then you can show off your power. Henry's family seemed to never expect that I, who had always been like a soft bun for them to knead, could be so tough one day. Henry's mother, regardless of my disrespect, stared at me blankly. Juliet, what on earth has happened to you, child? We're a family. What divorce talk? Don't say such unlucky things. That I was a bit annoyed by their tiresome behavior. Henry, as we agreed yesterday, let's go in quickly and get the certificate. After that, we'll go our separate ways. I took the lead and walked towards the service hall, but Henry suddenly grabbed my arm. What are you doing? I turned around impatiently. Juliet, don't be like this. You're not thinking rationally now, and there are misunderstandings between us. Don't act impulsively. It was rare for him to coax me in a gentle tone, but it was at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. I turned around and looked at him seriously. Henry, are you crazy? You can get rid of me, this despicable woman, without spending a single penny. Isn't that what you've been dreaming of? What are you hesitating about now? Henry's brows knitted tightly together. Juliet, I found out something yesterday. I admit that I've wronged you these years. Give me a chance to make up for it, okay? No need. I'll just consider what happened before as being bitten by a dog. As long as I don't have to face your family in the future, I'll wake up smiling happily in my dreams. Juliet. An embarrassed look flashed across Henry's face. Let's go home first. There are some things I need to explain to you. His attitude was firm, as if he would have someone tie me up and take me away if I didn't go with him. Coincidentally, I also had something to make clear to them. In the study of the Henry family, Henry was uncharacteristically amiable. Juliet, about the reception incident, we misunderstood you. I just found out yesterday that you were also a victim in that matter. I'm sorry. He said it sincerely, but I just sneered. You found out? How? Since you know I was wronged, who is the real culprit? Henry turned his face away in embarrassment, and Henry's mother's face turned bright red. Speak up. Weren't you saying that you know the truth and want to clear up the misunderstanding with me? Juliet, don't be so aggressive. What happened back then was a misunderstanding. No one wanted this to happen. A misunderstanding? With just one word of a misunderstanding, you made me carry the reputation of being despicable and work like a slave in your Henry family for 10 years? With just one word of a misunderstanding, you want to wipe away the evil your whole family did to me. Henry, you don't really think that marrying me was a great favor to me, and now that you tell me your family misunderstood me and decide to treat me well from now on, I should be so grateful that I kneel down and kowtow to thank you, do you? Wake up. The feudal era ended a long time ago. My successive rebukes left Henry speechless. If you know what's good for you, divorce me quickly. Or if you want to drag it out, that's fine too. Anyway, I have nothing to lose, so I'm not afraid of you. As I was about to go out, Henry's mother's old voice rang out. Juliet, our Henry family is sorry for you. It was me, this old fool, who did the wrong thing. I wrongly drugged you, and then I was afraid of being blamed by my children and grandchildren, so I made you suffer grievances for so many years. I, this old woman, am risking my old face to apologize to you. Juliet, you love Henry so much. Besides, you have Lucas. He's still so young. How can you bear to leave him? Mom. Lucas's crying sounded in a timely manner. I turned around and stretched out my hand to stop the little boy who was about to run over and hug me. If you had said these words to Juliet 3 years ago, she might have fainted with joy. But now, I just think your whole family is disgusting and hypocritical. Fine, since things have come to this, I might as well tell you the truth. Looking at the confusion in the eyes of Henry's family, I took out my newly issued ID card from my pocket. Lily? Henry read the name on it. You changed your name? As you can see, I'm not Juliet. My name is Lily. About 5 years ago, I had a car accident. When I woke up, I found myself in Juliet's body that I saw her being enslaved and humiliated by you, especially you. I looked at Edward with a cold tone. You're really the worst kid I've ever seen. Edward's body trembled that I didn't bother to care about him and continued. This state lasted for 2 years. One day, Juliet said to me, Lily, I can't hold on anymore. I'll give you my body. Please take care of them for 3 years, okay? Only then did I know that her depression had become so severe that it had manifested physically, and she had started to have self-destructive tendencies. She knew she could no longer be your wife, Henry. But Lucas was too young to grow up without a mother's care. So she thought of making this deal with me. I stopped and looked at the people with different expressions. What? Don't believe me? Think I'm telling a story? I threw a bunch of medical records on the table. Take a good look. See how your family drove Juliet to death. None of you should ever appear in front of me again. To be honest, if it weren't for the deal with Juliet, I wouldn't want to stay with you for even a second. There's not a single good person in your family from the old to the young. I left the Henry family without a trace of nostalgia. Henry's mother's face was filled with fear. Henry, is what she said true? Is Juliet a ghost? Will she come back to take revenge on us? She tremblingly hugged Edward. Henry, should we find a master to come and perform some rituals? Henry's heart was filled with mixed emotions at the moment. He only knew that their family didn't like Juliet, but he never expected that this dislike and mistreatment had been so severe that it had driven her to the point of suicide. Mom. Henry said with difficulty from his throat. There are no ghosts in this world. Juliet might just be sick. I'll find an authoritative doctor to look at her medical records. He fled the room as if running away. At this moment, Juliet's words kept ringing in his mind. So in her heart, she hated their family so much. This woman he had always looked down upon and thought was a stain on the Henry family. In her heart, their Henry family was the most disgusting and ugly people in the world. He was very efficient. It wasn't long before he got a preliminary diagnosis from the doctor. Judging from the medical records, Juliet had depression not long after giving birth to Lucas. But at that time, none of us noticed. Later, probably in an attempt to save herself, she split into a second personality, Lily. Henry said with difficulty, explaining to his mother and eldest son. The personality of Lily is completely different from her main personality. She doesn't love me, nor does she like anyone in the Henry family. Juliet's main personality should have noticed Lily's hostility towards the Henry family, so she never gave her the chance to take control of the body. But Henry swallowed the lump in his throat and continued. After a long time, later her symptoms became more and more obvious, such as heart palpitations, insomnia, trembling. Finally, after she almost committed suicide in front of Lucas, she was scared. This son she loved deeply, she couldn't bear to think about what kind of psychological shadow it would cast on him if one day she died in front of Lucas. But at that time, no one could help her. We, her so-called family, didn't even notice her pain. No, how could we not notice? We were just used to ignoring her, belittling her, and gradually pushing her to the edge. Actually, if she had left us at that time and changed to a better environment, she could have recovered. But she didn't. I guess it was because she couldn't bear to leave Lucas. She made a deal with Lily, asking Lily to accompany Lucas to grow up in her place, at the cost of her own permanent disappearance. When Henry said this, his voice was so hoarse that he couldn't even utter a single syllable. He clenched his fist tightly and pressed it hard against his lips, suppressing his sobs. He thought of the 1095th day that Lily had always emphasized. 3 years. Those were 3 years that Juliet had traded with her life. What had they done? He wasn't unaware of his eldest son's meanness to her. The dead bugs that appeared in her room, the handicrafts she painstakingly made that were deliberately broken, and even in the winter not long after she gave birth to Lucas, when his eldest son pushed her into the outdoor swimming pool. Now, thinking about all these things one by one, if it were anyone in the family who was treated like this by his son, no, even if it were a stranger, he would have scolded his son and taught him a good lesson. But for Juliet. He watched coldly as his son's pranks became more and more excessive. He even thought in his heart that this was the consequence of her scheming to marry him. He looked at his mother, this woman who might not be very wise but had always been kind-hearted. But it was also this old lady who could cry with empathy at the slightest hardship of an outsider, yet treated Juliet so harshly. When Lucas was at the age of learning to speak, he had once seen his mother deliberately accuse Juliet of being a bad woman who destroyed other people's families in front of Lucas. Later, their family went even further. His mother deliberately prevented Lucas from getting close to Juliet, and deliberately scolded her in front of the child, making her lose all dignity in front of the child. Obviously, after Juliet married into the family, she was very kind to them. She remembered everyone's preferences, was filial to his mother, cared for and loved Edward, and even had a child with him. But how could they enjoy her dedication while being so cruel to her? "Dad, please stop talking." Edward was the first to break down. "No, she won't disappear. She was so tough. No matter how much I annoyed her, she never got angry with me. How could she disappear?" Edward cried, but he didn't feel the usual heartache. They were all sinners and should be condemned by their consciences. My flower shop opened. Every day, I would go to my flower nursery to admire the riot of colors. When the sunlight filtered through the glass of the greenhouse and filled the room, my mood would instantly lighten up. There are quite a few tourists in this small town. Sometimes, my flower nursery also receives some guests. I enjoy warming up some tea and listening to interesting people share their experiences. Once, I had just seen off an elderly couple who had traveled to more than 20 countries after their retirement. I was laughing uncontrollably at the various jokes they made while teaching themselves English. When I turned around, I saw Henry and his 2 sons. My expression immediately turned cold. As I turned to close the door, Henry reached out to stop me. "Juliet, we're here to apologize today." He looked sorrowful, and the 2 children also had a gloomy look as if they had lost their mother. I didn't even want to look at this family for another second. "Your Juliet has been dead for 3 years. If it weren't for me, the grass on the grave of her body would be taller than your son. Now you think of coming to apologize?" "Mom." Lucas rushed up and hugged my leg. "Mom clearly isn't dead." "Mom, don't you want Lucas anymore?" I glanced at the little child, and the harsh words that were about to blurt out got stuck in my throat. "Lucas, be a good boy. Follow your dad and live a good life from now on." I pushed him away. Just as I was about to close the door, I suddenly heard another "Mom." It was Edward. I forcefully pulled the door open and looked at him with dagger-like eyes. "Shut up. What right do you have to call her Mom?" Edward seemed to be frightened by me, and even Henry tried to stand in front of me. I stepped closer to him step by step and said to him, "You, the prime culprit who drove her to death, what right do you have to call her Mom?" The boy was left stunned on the spot. "So, how did it feel to dissect her little goldfish with your own hands? Did you feel a great sense of achievement watching her suppress her grief and seeing the light in her eyes gradually go out from the shadows? You're such a little hero. You killed her last bit of hope with your own hands and then placed it on her pillow. Were you very happy?" Henry came to pull me. "Juliet, that's enough. He's still a child. A child? Yes, he's such a good child of your Henry family. He knew his stepmom was unpopular and that no one would stand up for her no matter how vicious he was to her. So your dear son at the most helpless and painful moment of Juliet destroyed her last bit of will to live. I didn't know. I really didn't know she was ill. I didn't know the goldfish meant so much to her. Edward broke down and cried. You knew. How could you not know? I stared at him viciously. Didn't you know her situation in the Henry family? She was called Mrs. Henry, but no one respected her or cared about her feelings. Even the clothes and jewels in the cloakroom were just lent to her for temporary show. Her depression was so severe at that time. She tried to save herself by wanting to keep a pet of her own, something to accompany her every day and listen to her talk. But in your Henry family, that man-eating place, what was she allowed to keep? Of course, cats and dogs were out of the question. She could imagine that if she brought back a dog or a cat, Edward would find all sorts of reasons to kill it the next day. After much thought, she secretly kept a fish in her room. Quietly, it wouldn't bother anyone and no one would find out. But even so, your dear son wouldn't let her be. He sneaked into her room, brutally dissected the two fish, and put the corpses on her pillow. Henry, tell me, isn't he your good son? Isn't he the good offspring raised by your Henry family? I couldn't help but laugh out loud. As I laughed, my face became cold with tears. Henry fled with his two sons. Later, I received the divorce agreement signed by Henry. He gave me a lot of money, almost half of his fortune. After that, every winter and summer vacation, I could see Lucas. He would just stand there from afar, sometimes looking at me, sometimes looking at my flower shop, but he never came in. I think he probably knew that I didn't want to see the Henry family anymore, including him. Extra story: my name is Edward. In the first 15 years of my life, I hated Juliet. And in the following decades, I've been atoning for my hatred. On the day when Dad took me and Lucas to apologize to her, when she was about to close the door without even looking at me, I called out that "Mom" out of the blue. It was this "Mom" that made me live in guilt for the rest of my life. That was the first time I called her Mom, and also the last time. From then on, this woman who had loved me for 10 years never gave me another chance to call her that. When we got home that day, Dad gave me a severe beating. The belt hurt when it lashed across my body, but I felt it wasn't enough. What were these pains compared to what I had done to her? Later, I cried, and Dad knelt down and cried with me. He said it wasn't my fault. He was the prime culprit. Juliet died because of his indifference and neglect. He was the one who deserved to die the most and atone for his sins. After that day, everyone changed. Grandma said she was going to a temple in the mountains to practice Buddhism. Dad didn't stop her. On the day Grandma left, she went to hug Lucas with red-rimmed eyes, but Lucas broke free. I knew Grandma was very sad, but these were all the sins we had committed. Lucas also changed. He became less talkative and no longer clung to me. I knew I was one of the people he hated. It was me who made him lose his mom. Dad also changed. Although he still worked, ate, and slept as usual, there was no longer any ease or comfort on his face. Once, I saw him burning Juliet's diary in the garden. He said these were too heavy, and it wouldn't be good if Lucas saw them in the future. When he finished burning, I saw him spit out a mouthful of blood with my own eyes. I also changed. I lost the right to be a child. Dad and my younger brother became my responsibility. Everyone was praising me for growing up and becoming a responsible man like Dad. But I know I'm not any kind of man. I'm the murderer who killed Juliet. Later, I never saw Juliet again. Actually, Dad takes my brother to see her every vacation. They just look at her from afar to see if she's doing well and happy. Oh, by the way, her flower shop later became an inn. Dad, she said, got to know a lot of people. She could talk with people from all over the country. She ran her business in a laid-back way. There were always half a year in a year when the business was closed because the boss was going traveling with friends. So I thought that she was probably really happy after leaving the Henry family. She was finally no longer someone's wife or someone's mom. She could finally be herself freely.